You don't hate yourself. You were taught to. That voice in your head telling you you're not good enough, it's not yours. It was installed slowly, systematically, and with frightening precision. From the moment you were born, society began molding you into something acceptable, manageable, controllable. You learned to shrink your truth in exchange for love, and to silence your soul for the comfort of others. And now, you call it personality. But what if it's just well-disguised self-rejection? Here's the part they don't tell you. Most people are walking around wearing a mask they don't even know exists. Carl Jung tried to warn us. He saw how shame, repression, and unconscious programming form the foundation of our inner critic. And guess what? That critic has been running your life. You weren't born broken. You were conditioned to betray your own instincts. That's why affirmation never works. You can't heal with sugar what was built with poison. This video is not for the faint of heart. It's not about loving yourself in a bubble bath. It's about confronting the parts of you that were exiled, shamed, and silenced. We're diving deep into the real roots of self-hatred, exploring how emotional abuse, generational trauma, and cultural conditioning shaped your mind. But don't worry, we won't stay in the dark, because what's buried isn't dead, and what you reclaim can change everything. How self-hatred is systematically conditioned. From the very beginning, the human mind is trained not to trust itself. A child learns quickly that crying too much, being too loud, or asking inappropriate questions leads to disapproval. And what does the child do? She starts shrinking. To be accepted, she buries her wildness and replaces it with what pleases others. That's how self-hatred starts, not as something natural, but as a psychological survival tactic. The inner child, once full of life, is slowly trained to become a persona, obedient, silent, and scared of being real. Conditioning doesn't shout, it whispers. It hides inside good grades, politeness, and a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. This is where cultural conditioning meets emotional abuse. When a child is rewarded for pleasing and punished for expressing, a dangerous link is formed. I am only worthy when I hide myself. Carl Jung would call this the first betrayal of the self. In society, it claps. It calls this adaptation growing up, but it's more like a slow psychological erosion of the soul. Shame becomes the leash. It's not just a feeling, it's a strategy. When someone shames you, they aren't trying to correct your behavior. They're trying to control your identity. Every time you're told you're too much, too sensitive, or not enough, you're not being educated. You're being programmed. Shame is the invisible rope that binds the inner life to the fear of rejection. And what's terrifying, people start using that same rope on themselves. That's how the inner critic is born. By the time you're an adult, that critic has become your narrator. You no longer need anyone to shame you. You do it yourself. That voice in your head, it's built from years of emotional control, projection, and inherited guilt. Most people walk around policing their own authenticity. They don't even need external control because the inner psychological prison was built so well. The human mind begins to attack itself before it ever questions the system that trained it. This is not just personal, it's historical. It's systemic. These patterns are passed down through generations like family recipes. Only instead of joy, they carry shame, repression, and low self-worth. From school systems to religious conditioning, everything is designed to reward the persona and punish the shadow. And if no one ever teaches you how this happened, you grow up believing that your self-hatred is your fault. But someone did try to teach us. His name was Carl Jung, and he had something to say about repression. Carl Jung and the shadow of repression. Carl Jung wasn't just a thinker. He was a truth excavator. He believed that every part of us we reject doesn't disappear, it just moves underground. That underground is the unconscious, and what lives there is the shadow. It's made of everything you were told was too ugly, too loud, too needy, too impulsive, or too real. The shadow isn't evil, it's exiled. And when the human mind ignores it, it grows teeth. What you deny in yourself eventually dominates you from the dark. Most people don't realize their self-hatred isn't about who they are. It's about who they've been told not to be. The repression of instincts, desires, and raw emotion creates a psychic imbalance. You weren't born feeling unworthy. You were taught to split yourself to survive in a world that rewards control over consciousness. Psychoanalysis, especially Jung's, reveals this silent war within. The more you repress, the more the shadow organizes its rebellion, not to destroy you, but to be seen. Think of that moment you explode with anger for no reason, or when you sabotage your own happiness just when things are going well. That's not you failing. That's your shadow screaming. Repression is a ticking time bomb, and it doesn't only affect individuals, it haunts cultures. Generations carry the residue of emotional abuse and unconscious programming like spiritual inheritance. The shadow becomes collective, influencing politics, art, religion, even how we raise our children. What Carl Jung dared to say, and what few people want to hear, is that healing doesn't begin with light. It begins in the dark. You have to go into the parts of yourself you were trained to fear, not with violence, but with witnessing. Shadow work isn't trendy, it's terrifying, but it's also the most radical act of self-worth there is. Because when you face your repressed desires, emotions, and truths, you finally stop treating yourself like the enemy. This isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. The shadow holds your creativity, your libido, your voice, your defiance, your truth. And as long as you repress it, you'll always feel like a stranger in your own skin. But before we integrate that shadow, we must understand what took its place. A mask, a performance, a fragile costume we call the persona, and the ruthless voice behind it known as the inner critic. The role of the persona and the inner critic. The persona is a survival mask. It's not who you are, it's who you perform to be. Carl Jung described it as the social self we create to win approval and avoid rejection. You learn to wear it early. Maybe you became the good kid, the smart one, or the funny friend, not because it was your truth, but because it worked. It got you love, safety, or at least silence. But here's the catch. The more the persona grows, the more the self shrinks. This mask needs maintenance. And that's where the inner critic comes in. Think of it as a psychological supervisor living rent-free in your mind, making sure you never slip out of character. Don't say that. It whispers. You're too much. It barks. Over time, this voice doesn't sound like your mother, father, or teacher anymore. It sounds like you. It becomes the conscience of the false self. And its job? To keep the shadow buried and the persona intact. Most people live in this tension. They're stuck between who they are and who they think they should be. This is where self-hatred multiplies, right in that gap. Every time you choose performance over presence, your self-worth takes a hit. You may look put together on the outside but feel hollow, confused, or anxious on the inside. That's the emotional tax of disconnection. You're not broken. You're just tired of acting. And the applause never lasts. Here's the tricky part. Society rewards the persona. Jobs, relationships, and social media thrive on it. Being good often means being compliant. But that goodness comes at the cost of vitality. When you hear the inner critic say you're not enough, try asking, enough for whom? That's where the inner dialogue begins to shift. Journaling, voice memos, or even therapy rooted in Jungian psychoanalysis can start peeling the mask layer by layer. Not with aggression, but with awareness. The goal isn't to destroy the persona. It has a role, but it's not the driver. You reclaim your power when you stop identifying with the mask and start listening to the parts it was designed to hide. Because beneath the critic, the persona, and the shame, there's something older, something deeper. And it didn't come from this generation. It came from generations before you, echoing patterns of collective trauma and inherited wounds that still shape your identity today. Cultural and generational inheritance of shame. You didn't invent your shame, you inherited it. Long before you had language, before you could even think for yourself, the emotional DNA of your lineage was already shaping your self-perception. Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious, and inside it lives more than just symbols. It holds collective trauma, repression, guilt, and fear passed down like family heirlooms. That's why sometimes you feel a heaviness in your soul that has no clear origin. It's not always yours, but you're still carrying it. Parents don't just pass down genes, they pass down wounds. Most of them don't mean harm. They simply weren't taught how to process their own pain. A father raised by silence teaches silence. A mother ashamed of her body teaches shame. Schools, religions, and institutions add their own flavor of psychological control, repeating mantras like, "You must earn love," or "Don't embarrass the family." And little by little, the child internalizes these patterns, not as lies, but as truth. Guilt becomes the leash generations learn to wear proudly. You're taught to feel guilty for resting, for saying no, for wanting more. This is how emotional abuse becomes normalized, even spiritualized. Ever heard, "You must suffer to grow"? That's not wisdom, it's conditioning. It keeps people small, obedient, and disconnected from their inner child. But make no mistake, shame is not a teacher. It's a jailer, and the bars are invisible until you question the story you've been given. Whole societies are built on unhealed wounds. Wars, oppression, religious extremism, all of it echoes unresolved psychological trauma. It's no coincidence that art, rebellion, and individuation often come from those who finally dare to break the cycle. You're not just healing your own mind. You're healing what your ancestors couldn't. That's why shadow work matters. Not because it's trendy, but because it interrupts a chain reaction that's been running for centuries. The weight of all this can feel unbearable at times. But here's the secret. The fact that you feel it means you're already more conscious than the ones who passed it on. You are the one the pattern didn't fully swallow. And if you're willing to look honestly at what you were taught to believe about yourself, you might just find the key to your liberation. That key is individuation. And it starts the moment you stop hiding from what you were taught to hate. The path to individuation and inner reconciliation. Individuation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally being who you were before the world told you who to be. Carl Jung described this as the journey back to the self, the center of the psyche, where all your contradictions find harmony. But to get there, you must confront everything you were trained to hate. The shadow, the shame, the scars, they aren't mistakes. They're maps. And following them with radical honesty is how you begin to reclaim what you abandoned to survive. Healing isn't clean. It's not morning meditations and candlelight journaling. It's ugly crying in the car, realizing your boundaries were never boundaries. They were fears. True self-love isn't soft, it's fierce. It says, "I won't abandon myself again just to be liked." This is where conscience meets courage. When you stop performing, stop pleasing, stop waiting for permission to exist, then the real work starts. And trust me, the inner critic will scream louder before it dies. The process of individuation asks you to look directly at your conditioning, not to hate your past, but to rewrite the story. You can't integrate what you won't face. Start small. Notice when you shrink your voice in conversations. Ask yourself who you're trying to protect. Maybe read Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul, or Clarissa Pinkola Estate's Women Who Run with the Wolves. These aren't just books. They're flashlights in the underworld of your psyche. Reconciliation doesn't mean pretending everything is okay. It means creating space for the parts of you that were never allowed to speak. Your inner child doesn't want you to fix her. She wants you to listen. Your anger isn't dangerous. It's the alarm system of your ignored truth. As you welcome these parts back home, something shifts. The shame that once silenced you becomes the fuel that awakens you. And in that fire, the old narrative burns away. You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be whole. But you can't be whole while living someone else's idea of who you should be. The mind, shaped by repression, emotional abuse, and cultural expectation, must now become your ally, not your enemy. Because once you taste the power of living unmasked, of loving without shame, of walking in your own rhythm, you'll never want to go back. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize you were trained to hate yourself so well that healing now feels rebellious. If you've made it this far, it means something inside you is waking up. Maybe for the first time, you're starting to question the voice that tells you you're not enough. But let me ask you this. Who benefits from your silence? Who wins when you hide, shrink, and apologize for simply existing? The truth is, the world doesn't need another well-behaved version of you. It needs the parts you've buried, the truth you've swallowed, the self you've forgotten. So now the choice is yours. Will you keep playing the role, nodding along while the inner critic runs the show? Or will you take the first step toward individuation, toward radical inner reconciliation? Start small. Challenge one belief that's been haunting you. Speak one truth you've been avoiding. Feel one emotion you've been numbing. Healing isn't a performance, it's a reclamation. And the only permission you need is your own. Ready to go deeper? Then don't just watch, act. Drop a comment below and tell me, which part of you have you been afraid to face? Which lie are you finally ready to stop believing? Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss a chance to wake up from the script you were never meant to follow. The self you've been looking for is already inside. Let's go find it.